The knock on my door came at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, and the woman standing there had the kind of haircut that screamed, "I need to speak with your manager," from 3 blocks away. "Are you Quinn Quade?" she demanded, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "That's me," I said, wiping motor oil off my hands with a rag. I'd been working on one of the sleds in my garage. "I'm Patricia Hendricks, president of the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your animals." She said the word animals like she was referring to a nest of vipers. I leaned against the door frame, already tired of this conversation. "My dogs." "Those are not dogs, Mr. Quad. Those are wolves. And according to Section 4.7 of our HOA bylaws, residents are not permitted to keep exotic or dangerous animals on the premises." I couldn't help but laugh. "Patricia, those are Alaskan Malamutes and Siberian Huskies. They're registered breeds. I've had them for 3 years, ever since I moved here." "Well, someone has finally brought them to our attention. The barking is disruptive and, frankly, they're intimidating to the other residents." She thrust a piece of paper toward me. "This is a formal notice. You have 30 days to remove them from the property or face fines of $500 per day, per animal." I took the paper, my jaw clenching. "I have 8 dogs, Patricia. Then I suggest you work quickly." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, past the large fenced area where my team was currently napping in the November sunshine. That night, I sat in my living room with the notice in one hand and my phone in the other, scrolling through the HOA bylaws. Sure enough, there it was, a vague clause about exotic animals that technically could be interpreted to include my dogs if someone really stretched the definition. The problem was, these weren't just pets. They were my partners, my team, and quite literally, they saved lives. I'd moved to Evergreen Hills, Montana, 3 years ago specifically because the property had enough land for my dogs and was still close enough to the state training facilities. As the lead trainer for Montana's mountain rescue dog sled teams, I needed space and access. The HOA had seemed like a minor inconvenience at the time, a small price to pay for the perfect location. Now I was regretting that decision. The next morning, I drove to the community center where the HOA held their offices. A young guy named Derek sat behind the front desk, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I need to speak with Patricia Hendricks," I said. "You have an appointment?" "No, but this is urgent." Derek picked up his phone, spoke quietly for a moment, then shook his head. "She says she's already addressed your issue, Mr. Quad. The notice stands. Can I at least appeal this to the full board? The next board meeting is in 3 weeks. I felt my frustration rising. "Look, these dogs aren't pets. They're working animals. I train search and rescue teams for the state. They're registered, vaccinated, and certified." Derek actually looked sympathetic. "I hear you, man, but Patricia runs a tight ship. Your best bet is to show up at the meeting with documentation and make your case. 3 weeks. The notice gave me 30 days, which meant I'd have barely a week after the meeting to make other arrangements if they ruled against me. I thanked Derek and left, my mind already racing through my options. Over the next few days, I tried to keep my head down and focus on my work. The Montana Department of Emergency Services had contracted me to run a training session the following month, and I needed to make sure the dogs were in peak condition. Every morning, I ran them through their drills, navigation exercises, scent tracking, stamina building. My lead dog, Kodiak, was a 100-pound Malamute with a work ethic that put most humans to shame. His sister, Aurora, ran second in the line, her ice blue eyes always scanning for the next challenge. The weather forecasts were starting to worry me. A major storm system was building in the Pacific Northwest, and the models showed it heading straight for Montana. We were looking at potentially the worst blizzard in 15 years, with predictions of 3 feet of snow and wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour. The state had already contacted me about being on standby for emergency rescue operations. Meanwhile, Patricia Hendricks seemed determined to make my life miserable. A week after the first notice, I found a citation on my door for excessive noise because my dogs had barked at a deer at 6 in the morning. 2 days later, another citation for unsightly outdoor structures, referring to the professional-grade dog houses I'd built. Each citation came with a $50 fine. I started documenting everything. I set up cameras around my property, kept logs of my dog's behavior, and gathered every piece of certification and documentation I had about my work with the state. If Patricia wanted a fight, I'd give her one, but I'd do it by the book. The night before the board meeting, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. I was in the garage, checking my emergency gear when my phone rang. It was Margaret Chen, my contact at the Department of Emergency Services. "Quinn, we're activating the emergency protocol. That storm is hitting tomorrow night and it's going to be bad. We need you and your team ready to deploy by Thursday morning at the latest." "I'll be ready," I said, glancing toward the house where the HOA notice still sat on my kitchen table. "Margaret, I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to provide a written statement about my work with the state? I'm having some issues with my HOA." She didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. I'll have it to you by tomorrow afternoon." "Quinn, what you do is critical to our emergency response infrastructure. Anyone giving you trouble about that needs to understand the bigger picture." The board meeting was held in the same community center, in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and air freshener. I arrived 15 minutes early with a folder full of documents, but Patricia was already there, holding court with the other board members, 2 older men named Richard and Tom, and a woman in her 40s named Jennifer. "Mr. Quade," Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "So good of you to join us." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, taking a seat in the front row of chairs set up for residents. The meeting started with standard business approval of minutes, discussion of a new landscaping contract, a debate about holiday decorations. Finally, Patricia cleared her throat and pulled out a file. "Now we come to the matter of Mr. Quade's violation of our exotic animal policies. As board president, I've issued a notice requiring the removal of 8 wolf hybrid dogs from his property within 30 days of the initial notice date, which was November 14th. We're now on December 5th, so he has 19 days remaining." "They're not wolf hybrids," I said, standing up. "May I address the board?" Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. "You have 5 minutes." I approached the table and opened my folder. "These are purebred Alaskan Malamutes and Siberian Huskies. Here are their AKC registration papers. Here are their veterinary records showing they are up to date on all vaccinations and health checks. And here," I pulled out the letter Margaret had emailed me that afternoon, "is a statement from the Montana Department of Emergency Services explaining that I am the lead trainer for the state's mountain rescue dog sled teams. These animals are working professionals who participate in saving lives during wilderness emergencies." Richard, one of the older board members, took the letter and read it, his eyebrows rising. "This says you've been involved in 17 successful rescue operations in the past 2 years. "That's correct, including the recovery of those hikers who got lost in Glacier National Park last spring. My team located them in conditions where helicopters couldn't fly and ground teams couldn't navigate quickly enough." Jennifer leaned forward. Why didn't you mention this when you first moved in? Honestly, I didn't think it would be an issue. The property met all my needs and the dogs are well trained and quiet. They're working animals, not pets, and they're treated as such. Patricia's face had gone red. That's all very impressive, Mr. Quad, but it doesn't change the fact that your neighbors have complained about the noise and the intimidating presence of these animals. Rules are rules. Which neighbors? I asked. I'd like to know who's filed complaints. That's confidential, Patricia snapped. Actually, Tom spoke up, looking at his own papers. HOA policy requires that we disclose the source of complaints if the accused party requests it. Says so right in Section 2.3. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. Mrs. Carmichael from 1847, Evergreen Drive, has expressed concerns. That was the house 2 doors down from mine. I'd met Mrs. Carmichael exactly once and she'd seemed pleasant enough. Has anyone else complained? Silence. So one person complained, and you're threatening to fine me $4,000 a day. The bylaws are clear, Patricia started. The bylaws say exotic animals, Jennifer interrupted. Are registered domestic dog breeds really exotic? I mean by that definition, couldn't someone claim that a Great Dane or a St. Bernard is exotic because of its size? It's about the safety of our community, Patricia insisted. With all due respect, Mrs. Hendricks, I said, keeping my voice level, my dogs are trained to save lives. They're better behaved than most pets. They don't roam, they don't bite, and they're properly contained. I've never had an incident in 3 years. Richard nodded slowly. I move that we table this discussion for further review. I think we need to clarify the language in our bylaws before we start enforcing them against working animals with professional certifications. I second that, Tom added. Patricia looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Fine. We'll revisit this at next month's meeting. Next month, I said. The deadline you gave me is in 19 days, Jennifer spoke up. I move that we suspend the deadline until we've made a final ruling. Seconded, Richard said. All in favor? Tom asked. 3 hands went up, everyone except Patricia. Motion carries, Tom said. Mr. Quad, you won't face any fines or enforcement action until we've resolved this properly. I thanked the board and left, feeling like I'd won a small battle but knowing the war was far from over. Patricia had followed me out into the parking lot, her face stormy. This isn't over, she said. You think you can just ignore our rules because you have some fancy job. I'm not ignoring anything. I'm following the proper channels and providing documentation. That's how this is supposed to work. Those animals are a menace. Someone's going to get hurt, and when they do, it'll be on your head. She stalked off before I could respond, leaving me standing in the cold parking lot wondering what I'd done to earn this level of hostility. The next day, the storm hit. It started as light snow around noon, but by 3 p.m., the wind had picked up and visibility had dropped to near zero. I'd spent the morning preparing, checking all my gear, making sure the dogs were fed and rested, and loading my truck with emergency supplies. The call from Margaret came at 4:30. Quinn, we've got a situation. A family of 4 went snowshoeing in the Lewis Range this morning and didn't return. Their car is at the trailhead, but there's no sign of them. Ground teams can't get in, and the weather's too bad for air support. How fast can you get to the staging area? Give me 90 minutes, I said, already pulling on my gear. Be careful out there. This storm is a monster. I loaded the dogs into their transport, a specially designed trailer that kept them warm and secure. Kodiak was already alert, sensing that we had work to do. Aurora paced in her compartment, eager to run. The other 6 members of the team, Denali, Sitka, Yukon, Tundra, glacier, and avalanche settled in with the calm focus of experienced professionals. The drive to the staging area took 2 hours instead of 90 because of the road conditions. Snow was falling so hard that my wipers could barely keep up, and the wind rocked my truck with every gust. By the time I arrived, full darkness had fallen, and the emergency command center was a cluster of vehicles with lights cutting through the swirling white. Margaret met me as I climbed out of the truck. "Thank God. We've got a direction of travel from their trail sign in, but that's it. They've got 2 kids with them, ages 7 and 10. Last known position was around the Bear Creek Junction, but that was 7 hours ago. Temperature: 15 degrees and dropping. Wind chill is well below 0. I nodded, running through the calculations in my head. A family with young kids wouldn't move fast, especially in these conditions. They'd likely seek shelter when the storm got bad, which meant they could be anywhere along a 3-mile radius. But my dogs could cover that ground in a fraction of the time it would take ground teams, and they could track scents that humans would never detect. "I'll need their scent articles," I said. Margaret handed me a sealed bag containing a jacket and a stuffed animal. "Parents left these in the car." I spent the next 20 minutes harnessing the team and reviewing the topographic maps with the incident commander. Then, with headlamps blazing and GPS trackers active, we headed into the storm. Running a dog sled in a blizzard is like piloting a ship through a hurricane. The snow comes at you sideways, stinging any exposed skin. The wind tries to shove you off course with every gust. Visibility extends maybe 10 feet on a good moment, but my dogs were born for this. Kodiak led the line with absolute confidence, his powerful legs churning through snow that was already knee-deep. Aurora matched his pace perfectly, and behind them, the rest of the team pulled like their lives depended on it. We followed the trail for the first mile, but then it disappeared under fresh snow. I stopped the team and brought Kodiak up to scent the articles. His nose worked the fabric, processing information, and then he was off, pulling hard to the northeast. We left the main trail and plunged into unmarked territory, the sled bumping over hidden obstacles as the dogs navigated by instinct and training. 2 miles in, Kodiak suddenly changed direction, angling toward a cluster of rock formations. I trusted his judgment completely. These dogs had found people in conditions where high-tech equipment had failed. If Kodiak said they were there, they were there. We found the family huddled in a small cave formed by overlapping boulders. The father had managed to create a basic shelter with their emergency blanket, but all 4 of them were showing signs of hypothermia. The kids were barely conscious. I immediately radioed our position and started emergency warming protocols. The dogs settled into a protective circle around the family. It's something they do instinctively, using their body heat to create a warm zone. I got the emergency heating packs activated and wrapped the kids in my spare thermal blankets. "You're going to be okay," I told the mother, who was crying with relief and cold. "Help is coming." "The storm," the father said through chattering teeth. "We tried to get back, but we couldn't see anything." "You did the right thing finding shelter. Just stay still and let us take care of you." The rescue helicopter made it in 40 minutes later, guided by my GPS coordinates and a brief break in the weather. The paramedics loaded the family aboard while I packed up my gear. The mother grabbed my hand before they lifted her into the helicopter. "Thank you," she said. "Those dogs saved our children." "They're good at their job," I replied. The flight back to the staging area was triumphant. Margaret met me with hot coffee and a tired smile. "Damn good work, Quinn. The kids are going to be fine, thanks to you." "Thanks to the team," I corrected, looking back at my dogs, who were eating their post-mission meal with satisfied efficiency. I didn't get home until 3 in the morning. The storm was still raging, and my street was buried under 2 feet of snow with more falling every minute. I unloaded the dogs, checked each one over for injuries, and made sure they had food and warm shelter. Then I stumbled into my house and collapsed into bed. The pounding on my door woke me at 8 a.m. I dragged myself up, every muscle aching, and found Patricia Hendricks on my doorstep once again. Behind her, the world was completely white. The storm had intensified overnight, and I could barely see across my yard. "This is unacceptable," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "What is?" "Your dogs kept the entire neighborhood awake last night with their barking and howling." I stared at her. "Patricia, I got home at 3 a.m. from a rescue operation. My dogs have been sleeping since then." "Don't lie to me," multiple residents complained. Multiple residents, in this storm. Who exactly went outside in blizzard conditions to check who was making noise? Her face flushed. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying that my dogs were not the problem. And frankly, I'm too tired to deal with this right now. I've been up for 24 hours saving a family's life." "Oh, so now you're a hero. That doesn't give you the right to flout our community standards." Something in me snapped. "You know what, Patricia? Yes, I am a hero. Or at least my dogs are. While you were warm in your bed last night, we were out in sub-zero temperatures finding 2 children who would have died otherwise. So excuse me if I don't have the energy for your petty complaints right now." I closed the door in her face and went to take a shower. My hands were shaking partly from exhaustion, partly from anger. I'd dealt with difficult people before, but Patricia's timing was beyond belief. The rest of the day was a blur. The storm continued to rage, and by evening, Evergreen Hills was completely snowed in. The main roads were impassable, and the power had gone out in large sections of the subdivision. I had a generator and plenty of supplies, so I was fine, but I could see people on my street struggling to clear their driveways and sidewalks. Around 6 p.m., my phone rang. It was Derek from the HOA office, and he sounded panicked. "Mr. Quade, is this Quinn Quade?" "Yeah, Derek. What's wrong?" "It's Mrs. Hendricks. She left the office around noon to check on some properties, and she hasn't come back. Nobody's heard from her, and her car is still gone." With the roads like this, where was she checking? The properties on the east side, up near the hill. But that's all I know. The east side of Evergreen Hills bordered on undeveloped land, basically the beginning of wilderness. If Patricia had gotten stuck up there in this storm, she was in serious trouble. "Have you called emergency services?" "They are completely overwhelmed. Everything is shut down because of the storm. They said they'd send someone when they could, but that could be hours." I looked out my window at the driving snow. Every instinct told me to stay inside, to let Patricia deal with the consequences of her own poor decisions. She'd spent weeks making my life miserable, questioning my work, threatening my dogs. But I also knew that nobody deserved to die in a blizzard, no matter how annoying they were. "I'll go look for her," I said. "Really? After everything she's—" "Yeah. Give me any details you have about her route." 20 minutes later, I was back in my gear with the team harnessed and ready. The dogs sensed another mission and responded with focused energy. This time, I loaded extra emergency supplies, including a portable shelter and medical kit. If Patricia was hurt or stuck, I'd need to stabilize her until we could get real help. The east side of Evergreen Hills was only about 2 miles from my house, but in these conditions, it might as well have been 20. The snow was now waist-deep in places, and the wind had created massive drifts that blocked streets and covered landmarks. I navigated by GPS and memory, trusting Kodiak to find safe passage. We found her car at the top of Ridgeline Road, right where the pavement ended and the wilderness began. The sedan was buried up to its doors in snow, and I could see a figure slumped in the driver's seat. I secured the team and waded through the drift to reach the car. Patricia was conscious but clearly hypothermic. Her lips were blue, and she couldn't stop shaking. The car had run out of gas hours ago, and the interior was barely warmer than outside. "Patricia, can you hear me?" She nodded weakly. "I'm going to get you out of here, but you need to work with me, okay?" It took considerable effort to extract her from the car. She could barely stand, and I had to support most of her weight as we made our way back to the sled. I got her wrapped in emergency blankets and activated more heat packs, then settled her into the sled basket normally used for gear, but it could accommodate a person in an emergency. The trip back was slower. I had to be careful not to jostle Patricia too much, and the dogs had to navigate around obstacles they'd powered through on the way up. But Kodiak was brilliant as always, finding a path that minimized the rough terrain. We made it back to my house in just under an hour. I got Patricia inside, started warming her up properly, and called for an ambulance. The dispatcher said it would be at least 2 hours before they could reach my address, so I focused on treating her hypothermia according to my wilderness first aid training. Patricia drifted in and out of consciousness, but eventually her shaking subsided and her color improved. I made her hot soup and forced her to drink small sips. By the time the ambulance finally arrived 3 hours later, she was coherent enough to protest. "I don't need a hospital," she muttered. "Yes, you do," I said firmly. "You had moderate hypothermia. They need to check you out properly." The paramedics agreed with me and loaded her onto a gurney. Before they wheeled her out, Patricia grabbed my sleeve. "Your dogs," she said weakly. "They saved me." "They're good at their job." I replied the same thing I told the mother last night. After the ambulance left, I took care of my team. 2 missions in 2 days was hard work, even for dogs as fit as mine. I made sure each one got a thorough checkup, extra food, and plenty of water. Then I sat in my living room with a beer, watching the snow continue to fall, and wondered what would happen next. The storm finally broke 2 days later. Evergreen Hills looked like it had been transplanted to the Arctic, everything buried under 4 feet of snow, with drifts reaching 8 or 9 feet in places. The cleanup would take weeks, but at least people could start digging out. My phone had been buzzing constantly with messages. The local news had picked up the story about the family rescue, and now apparently everyone wanted to interview the blizzard rescue hero. I ignored most of them. What I did respond to were the messages from Margaret, checking on me, and one from Derek at the HOA office, letting me know that Patricia was going to be fine. She'd been treated for hypothermia and released from the hospital after an overnight observation. A week after the storm, I received a formal letter from the HOA. I braced myself for another citation, another threat. Instead, I found a letter signed by all 4 board members, including Patricia. "Dear Mr. Quade," it read. "In light of recent events, and after careful review of our bylaws, the Evergreen Hills HOA Board has determined that your working dog sled team does not fall under the exotic animal restrictions outlined in Section 4.7. Furthermore, we recognize the valuable service these animals provide to our community and the state of Montana. All previous citations and fines have been voided, and we apologize for any inconvenience this matter has caused. We would also like to extend our sincere gratitude for your assistance during the recent emergency weather event. Your actions likely saved a life." The letter was professional and formal, but there was a handwritten note at the bottom in what I recognized as Patricia's handwriting. "Thank you. I was wrong, PH. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired and relieved that it was over. The following week, Patricia showed up at my door again. This time, she looked different, less rigid, more uncertain. "Can we talk?" she asked. I invited her in and made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I owe you an apology," Patricia finally said. "A real one, not just a note on a letter. I was completely out of line about your dogs. I didn't understand what they were or what you did, and I didn't try to understand. I just saw a problem that needed fixing according to the rules." "Why did you push so hard?" I asked. "Even after I explained what the dogs were for," she sighed, looking down at her coffee. "My grandson was bitten by a dog last year. Nothing serious, but it scared him badly. When Mrs. Carmichael mentioned your dogs looked intimidating, I saw it as my responsibility to protect the community. But that wasn't about protection, really. It was about my own fear and anger." "Mrs. Carmichael's complaint, was that real?" Patricia shook her head. "She mentioned it in passing at a community event. Said your dogs were big but seemed well behaved. I'm the one who turned it into an official complaint. I pushed the board to take action." "Patricia, those dogs saved your life." "I know. And that's something I'm going to have to live with, knowing I tried to get rid of the very animals that rescued me." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Quinn. Truly sorry. Not just for the HOA stuff, but for not listening, for not trying to understand before I acted." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry about the stress she'd caused, about the threat to my dogs and my work. But looking at her now, seeing genuine remorse and recognition of her mistakes, I felt that anger start to fade. "Apology accepted," I said. "And for what it's worth, I hope your grandson gets past his fear of dogs. Maybe someday he'd like to meet my team under controlled circumstances. Sometimes understanding helps more than avoidance." Patricia smiled, wiping her eyes. "I'd like that. And Quinn, if there's ever anything I can do, anything the HOA can do to support your work, please let us know. What you do matters. I understand that now." After she left, I went out to check on the dogs. They were playing in the snow, wrestling and running like the athletes they were. Kodiak came up to me and pushed his massive head against my leg, and I scratched behind his ears. "You're better diplomats than I am, buddy," I told him. The next board meeting happened 2 weeks later. I didn't attend, I didn't need to anymore, but Derek called me afterward to tell me what happened. Patricia had proposed a formal partnership between the HOA and my rescue operations, offering to help promote awareness of the program, and even setting up a community fund to support equipment and training costs. The board had approved it unanimously. She basically gave a whole speech about how the community needs to support people doing important work, not obstruct them, Derek told me. It was actually pretty moving. I think she really gets it now. Christmas came and went. The family I'd rescued during the blizzard sent me a card with a picture of their kids playing in the snow, healthy and happy. "You gave us the greatest gift," the message inside read. "Thank you for bringing our family home." I put it on my refrigerator next to my rescue certifications and the letter from the HOA. Reminders of why the work mattered, even when it got difficult. In January, Margaret called with news. "The governor wants to recognize you and your team at a state ceremony. You're getting a commendation for service to Montana. It's a big deal, Quinn." "Do I have to wear a suit?" she laughed. "Probably, but you can bring the dogs." The ceremony was held in Helena on a cold but clear day. I stood on a stage in a borrowed suit while Governor Williams talked about courage and service and the importance of emergency preparedness. My dog sat in a line beside me, perfectly behaved, looking dignified and professional. When the governor presented the commendation, Kodiak let out a single bark, which made everyone laugh. Patricia was in the audience. She'd driven up with several other Evergreen Hills residents, including Mrs. Carmichael and the other board members. After the ceremony, she came up to congratulate me. "I'm proud to have you in our community," she said, shaking my hand. "And I'm proud that I get to tell people we have a state-recognized hero living in Evergreen Hills." "The dogs are the heroes," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "Then we're proud to have them too." Life settled into a new normal after that. The HOA left me alone, more than alone, actually. They featured me and my work in the community newsletter and invited me to speak at a neighborhood event about emergency preparedness. Kids started asking their parents if they could meet the rescue dogs, and I organized a few controlled visits where families could learn about the dogs and the work we did. Patricia and I developed an unlikely friendship. She was still intense and rules-oriented, but she'd learned to channel that energy more productively. When another resident started complaining about a neighbor's vegetable garden being unsightly, Patricia shut it down immediately, pointing out that the HOA existed to maintain property values and safety, not to dictate personal preferences. In March, the state called me out for another rescue, a climber who'd fallen in the Beartooth Mountains. We found him in 6 hours, brought him down safely, and the next day there was a letter in my mailbox from the HOA board. "Congratulations on another successful rescue. Evergreen Hills is lucky to have you." Small things, maybe, but they mattered. They showed that people could change, that communities could grow, and that understanding could replace fear and prejudice if you gave it a chance. One evening in April, I was running the dogs through training exercises when Patricia walked up to my fence. She watched for a few minutes, and I could see her really seeing them for the first time, not as threats or problems, but as the magnificent working animals they were. "They're beautiful," she said. "The way they move, the way they work together. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." "Better late than never," I replied, calling the team to a halt. Kodiak trotted over to the fence, and after a moment's hesitation, Patricia reached out to let him sniff her hand. He gave it a gentle lick and she smiled. "My grandson asked if he could meet them," she said. "Would that be okay? I know it's a lot to ask. Bring him by this weekend. We'll start slow, let him get comfortable." The visit went better than I could have hoped. Patricia's grandson, a shy 8-year-old named Timothy, was nervous at first. But I introduced him to Aurora, who was the gentlest of my team, and within an hour, Timothy was sitting in the snow giggling while Aurora licked his face. By the end of the visit, he was asking his grandmother if they could get a dog. "We'll see," Patricia said, but she was smiling. As they left, she turned back to me. "Thank you for this. You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did," I said. "That's what neighbors do." Summer brought new challenges and new rescues. A group of fishermen trapped by a flash flood. A hiker with a broken leg 15 miles from the nearest road. A child who wandered away from a campsite. Each time, my team responded with skill and dedication. Each time, we brought people home safely. The local news did a feature story about us in July. They interviewed Margaret, who called me the backbone of Montana's wilderness rescue operations. They interviewed the family from the blizzard, who'd become advocates for wilderness safety training. And they interviewed Patricia, who talked about learning to look beyond surface appearances to see the real value in things. "I almost let my fear and ignorance destroy something important," she said on camera. "I'm grateful I got a second chance to make it right." The story went viral online. I started getting messages from HOA horror story websites and social media accounts, people amazed that an HOA president had actually admitted she was wrong and changed her behavior. "This is the rarest thing on the internet," one comment read. "An HOA villain redemption arc." I showed the comment to Patricia and she rolled her eyes. I was never a villain, just misguided. Little bit villainous, I teased. Maybe a little, she admitted with a laugh. In August, the state expanded my contract and requested that I train 2 additional teams. It meant more work, but it also meant more capability for Montana's emergency services. I found 2 promising handlers and started working with them, teaching them everything I knew about dog behavior, navigation, survival skills, and rescue techniques. Patricia attended several training sessions, watching from a distance. Afterward, she told me she'd proposed to the HOA board that they designate my property as a community service zone, which would exempt it from most standard restrictions and recognize its importance to public safety. The board had approved it unanimously. "You're really making up for lost time," I observed. "I have a lot to make up for," she replied. By fall, the new teams were operational, and Montana had tripled its dog sled rescue capacity. Margaret threw a celebration at the emergency services headquarters, and the whole community was invited. I watched as my dogs mingled with the crowd, professional, calm, letting children pet them while maintaining their dignity. Timothy, Patricia's grandson, had become one of my regular volunteers. He helped with basic care tasks and loved learning about the dogs. He'd overcome his fear entirely and now talked about becoming a rescue handler himself when he grew up. "You've given him something to aspire to," Patricia told me that night. "More than that, you've shown him that courage and service matter. That's a gift." The following winter brought another massive storm, but this time, everyone was prepared. The state activated emergency protocols early, and my teams were deployed to strategic locations across Montana. We ran 12 separate rescue missions over 5 days, bringing 32 people to safety. Among those rescued were 2 teenagers who'd ignored warnings and gone snowboarding in a restricted area. When we found them, cold and scared but alive, one of them looked up at me and said, "Are you the guy from that news story?" "With the HOA." "That's me," I confirmed. "Dude, your story is legendary. Our HOA won't let us have a basketball hoop. Maybe we need rescue dogs." I laughed and got them loaded up for transport back to safety. Even in the middle of a crisis, the story had taken on a life of its own. In February, exactly 1 year after Patricia had first knocked on my door with that citation, she showed up again. I opened the door with mock suspicion. "Are you here to ban my dogs again?" She smiled and held up a plaque. "Actually, I'm here to give you this. It's from the HOA. We're designating you as Resident of the Year. I know it's just a plaque, but we wanted you to know how much we appreciate you." I took the plaque, genuinely touched. It was a simple thing, wood with an engraved brass plate, but it represented something bigger: acceptance, recognition, understanding. "Thank you, Patricia. This means a lot. You've earned it, multiple times over." She paused, then added, "I'm stepping down as HOA president next month. Jennifer is taking over. I think it's time for some fresh leadership." "That's a big decision. Are you okay?" "More than okay. I've realized that I was holding onto that position for the wrong reasons: control, fear, the need to feel important. But there are better ways to contribute to a community. I'm thinking about volunteering with emergency services, actually. Nothing dramatic, just answering phones or helping with administrative work." Margaret said they could use the help. She's right. And you'd be good at it. Maybe I can finally do something actually useful instead of just pushing papers and citing people for minor infractions. She looked past me toward the yard where the dogs were playing. "They changed my life, Quinn. Your dogs and you. I needed that change." After she left, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. Kodiak lay at my feet, Aurora beside him, and I could hear the rest of the team moving around in their yard. These dogs had given me purpose, saved dozens of lives, and apparently transformed at least one person's entire perspective on life. Not bad for a pack of dangerous exotic animals. Spring arrived early that year. I spent March and April running conditioning exercises and preparing for the summer season. Mountain rescues didn't stop just because the snow melted. People got lost, injured, or stranded year-round. And while dog sleds weren't always the right tool, my dogs were trained for ground tracking as well. In May, I got invited to speak at a national conference on wilderness rescue operations. They wanted me to present on the effectiveness of dog sled teams in extreme weather conditions. I accepted, though public speaking wasn't exactly my favorite activity. Patricia offered to watch the dogs while I was gone, which showed just how far we'd come. A year ago, she'd wanted them removed from the neighborhood. Now she was volunteering to care for them. The conference was in Colorado, and my presentation went better than expected. Other states started reaching out, asking about establishing similar programs. Margaret was thrilled. It meant more funding, more recognition, and more resources for the work we were doing. When I returned to Montana, there was a news crew waiting at my house. Apparently, my story had been picked up by a national morning show, and they wanted to do a feature segment. I agreed, mostly because Margaret convinced me it would help with program funding. The segment aired in June. They called it The HOA President Who Learned to Love Her Neighbor's Rescue Dogs, and it was surprisingly well done. They'd interviewed me, Patricia, Margaret, the family from the blizzard, and even Timothy, who'd become much more comfortable on camera than I ever would be. The response was overwhelming. The HOA received dozens of letters and emails from people sharing their own stories of HOA conflicts and praising Patricia for her willingness to change. My rescue program got calls from organizations across the country wanting to learn more. And most importantly, several families who'd been considering moving to Montana specifically cited my program as a reason they wanted to live in a state that supported that kind of community service. Through all of it, I kept focused on the work. The dogs didn't care about media attention or public recognition. They cared about running, working, and doing what they'd been trained to do. That grounded me when everything else felt overwhelming. In July, I got a call from an unexpected source, Mrs. Carmichael, the neighbor whose casual comment had started the whole mess with Patricia. "Mr. Quade, I hope I'm not bothering you," she said nervously. "I wanted to apologize. I never intended for any of that trouble with Patricia. I just mentioned in passing that your dogs were large, and somehow it turned into this whole thing. Mrs. Carmichael, you didn't do anything wrong. Patricia has explained what happened, and none of it was your fault. Still, I felt terrible when I found out. Your dogs are wonderful. I see you working with them sometimes, and it's clear they're very special. Would you like to meet them properly?" She came over that afternoon, and I introduced her to the team. She was delightful, a retired teacher with a gentle manner that the dogs responded to immediately. We talked for 2 hours about her late husband, who'd been a ranger in Yellowstone, and my work with the rescue teams. "He would have loved what you're doing," she told me. "He always said the wilderness demanded respect and preparation. Your dogs embody both." As summer turned to fall, I reflected on everything that had changed in 18 months. What had started as a nightmare scenario, losing my dogs and my ability to do my work, had transformed into something positive. The community understood and supported what I did. Patricia had become an ally and friend. And most importantly, my dogs were safe, recognized, and appreciated for the professionals they were. In October, the state announced a major expansion of the Wilderness Rescue Program, with funding for 10 additional dog sled teams across Montana. They'd created a new position, director of canine rescue operations, and offered it to me. It meant less time in the field, more time training and coordinating, but it also meant building something sustainable that would outlast my own career. I accepted, though I negotiated for the right to still run missions with my own team. I wasn't ready to give up that connection, that partnership with my dogs. Patricia was one of the first people to congratulate me. From HOA target to state director in less than 2 years. That's quite a journey. Couldn't have done it without you, I said with a grin. Oh, shut up, I almost ruined everything. But you didn't. You learned, changed, and helped make things better. That's what matters. The winter was busy but manageable. With more teams operational, the workload was distributed, and nobody got overwhelmed. We ran successful missions throughout the season, and the media continued to follow the program's growth. In January, 2 years after the blizzard that had changed everything, Patricia organized a community event celebrating the rescue program. It was held in the Evergreen Hills Community Center, and the turnout was incredible. Families, local officials, media representatives, and emergency services personnel packed the room. Margaret gave a speech about the importance of community support for emergency services. The governor sent a video message praising Montana's leadership in wilderness rescue. And Patricia presented me with a donation check. The community had raised $50,000 for equipment and training. This is what happens when people understand something instead of fearing it, Patricia told the crowd. 2 years ago, I tried to ban these dogs from our neighborhood because I didn't understand their purpose. Today, our community is proud to support them. That's growth. That's what we should all aspire to. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, people lined up to meet the dogs, take pictures, and hear stories about various rescues. My team handled it all with professional grace, as always. Timothy, now 10 years old, had brought a poster he'd made for school about careers in emergency services. It featured drawings of my dogs and a big title, "When I grow up, I want to save lives like Mr. Quinn." "Your spelling has improved," I told him, examining the poster. He beamed. "Grandma helped, but I did all the drawings myself. They're great. Your grandfather would be proud." Patricia overheard and smiled. He would be. Of Timothy, of you, of all of this. As the event wound down and people started leaving, I stood outside with my team. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead, mountains dark against the sky. This was Montana at its best, beautiful, challenging, and full of possibility. Kodiak nudged my hand and I scratched his ears. "Good boy. You and your team have done so much good." He looked up at me with those intelligent eyes, and I swear he understood every word. The next morning, I woke to find another letter from the HOA in my mailbox. For a split second, that old anxiety kicked in. What now? But when I opened it, I found a simple thank you note signed by every resident on my street. "Thank you for being our neighbor, our protector, and our friend. We're lucky to have you and your amazing dogs in our community." I kept that letter with all the others, the commendations, the news articles, the thank you cards from rescued families. Reminders of why the work mattered, why fighting for what was right was always worth it, even when it seemed impossible. Years would pass. More rescues, more teams trained, more lives saved. Timothy would eventually join my program as a junior handler, working toward his dream. Patricia would become a fixture at emergency services, her organizational skills and dedication making her invaluable. And my dogs would continue doing what they did best, running through impossible conditions to bring people home. But it all traced back to that moment when Patricia knocked on my door with a citation and a demand I couldn't accept. Sometimes the worst conflicts lead to the best outcomes, if everyone's willing to learn and grow. I looked at Kodiak, Aurora, and the rest of my team and thought about all the people they'd saved, all the families they'd reunited, all the hope they'd delivered in desperate situations. Patricia had called them dangerous. She'd wanted them banned. Now she called them heroes, and she was right. They were heroes, every single one of them, and I was grateful every day that I'd fought to keep them, to protect them, and to show one stubborn HOA president that sometimes the things we fear most are exactly what we need. The story could have ended differently. The HOA could have forced me to give up my dogs. Patricia could have remained rigid and unwilling to change. The community could have sided with fear over understanding. But none of those things happened, because people chose differently. They chose to listen, to learn, and to support something bigger than their own comfort. That was the real miracle, not the rescues, dramatic as they were, but the simple human capacity to admit mistakes, change perspectives, and become better. Patricia had shown more courage in acknowledging she was wrong than most people show in their entire lives. And that courage had rippled outward, transforming a community. As spring arrived again, bringing new challenges and new opportunities, I felt grateful for all of it: the struggle, the conflict, the resolution, and the friendship that had grown from opposition. My dogs had saved Patricia's life during that blizzard, but in a way, she'd saved something too. She'd saved her own capacity for growth and change. And in doing so, she'd helped save a program that would go on to rescue hundreds more people in the years ahead. Life in Evergreen Hills settled into a rhythm I never could have imagined 2 years earlier. The HOA that once threatened my work now celebrated it. The president, who wanted my dogs gone, now volunteered her time to support emergency services. And the community that barely knew what I did now took pride in being home to a state-recognized rescue program. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still challenges, disagreements, and difficulties. But it was real, earned through hard work, honest communication, and the willingness of imperfect people to become better versions of themselves. And through it all, my dogs kept running, kept working, kept saving lives. Because that's what they were born to do, and nothing, not blizzards, not bureaucracy, not even the most determined HOA president could stop them from fulfilling their purpose. That was the real story. Not HOA banned my sled dogs, but HOA tried to ban my sled dogs, then learned what really mattered. It was a story about redemption, understanding, and the power of working animals to bridge divides and save lives in more ways than one. And every time I harnessed up my team for another training run or another rescue, I remembered how close I'd come to losing all of it, and I was grateful for my dogs, grateful for the work, and yes, even grateful for Patricia Hendricks and her journey from antagonist to ally. Because the best stories aren't about easy victories. They're about hard-won understanding, about people who find the courage to change, and about communities that learn to value what truly matters. This was one of those stories, and I was honored to have lived it.